When you read about the Roman Republic, and particularly its last few generations, and that era when political competition starts to become violent, leading to rioting, to murder, to civil war, and eventually the collapse of the republican system and the creation of the monarchy, the Principate, by Caesar Augustus, you'll come across expressions like Optimates and Populares, although personally, I always tend to call them Optimates. I tend to anglicize the word just because it's natural. And in some books, particularly older books, you will find these turned into something very, very close to political parties. Two competing factions, two competing ideologies, different people, different views on how the state should run, who again and again butt heads, and eventually they destroy the Republic in their fighting. You do have to be a little bit careful. The Romans do use both of these terms, as do subsequent Greek and Roman historians talking about the period. But again, how they do it isn't quite the same as the way it's been used by more modern commentators. Now, although this party system or family-based faction system is less popular in academic works on the era now, it's still there. It still tends to make its way into a lot of the popular books, and it's sometimes even there from the academic side. So I thought it'd be worth just looking at these terms and considering a little bit about them and how the Romans at the time, rather than the Romans a century or so later, saw these things and how they used these words. And you can tell from their meaning. Optimates means the best men. And Cicero will use this term. He will also use the other one, the boni, the good men. Now, this isn't always used in a literal accepting sense. Cicero refers to the boni as mostly men from well-established families, mostly ones who are doing rather well within the system of the res publica at that time, and who represent a conservative with a small c opposition, as it were, to anyone wanting to change things. They are essentially happy with the state as it functions, but they're also they're concerned less about policies than perhaps about the rise of individuals. They buy in very heavily to the sense that they are the good men, the best men of the state, and that therefore it is very right and proper that they should be the leaders of the state. They should decide what happens. And Cicero is not naive enough to think that they are unselfish in this. And several people like Appius Claudius, his predecessor as governor of Cilicia, who are part of this group, even though some of their other family members are not, or not considered to act in the same way, he can see him as a rapacious monster, someone who's exploiting the provincials, who is squeezing money out of them simply for his own personal profit and glory, who treats other people like dirt, including respectable, ought to be honoured Romans like Cicero himself, and isn't acting for the good of the Republic, is simply acting in his own selfish interests. So Cicero is not naively taking these as literally true, that these are the very good men, the very best men in the state, and they deserve to be on top. After all, Cicero himself is a new man. No one in his family has risen to the consulship before. They haven't been in the Senate before. So he and his brother are pioneers from the point of view of that particular family. And therefore, while Cicero wants acceptance by those who are already established, he's also an outsider. So he isn't always treated very well by these same people, which adds to the ambiguity. He'd like them to like him, but they don't, and he knows they don't to a fair extent, and he knows he can't fully rely on them. And also he can see things from a different perspective because he hasn't been born with that sense of aristocratic right to lead, to rule, to be successful. But of course, the obvious thing about Optimates, boni, words like that, is that these are terms you like to apply to yourself and your friends, your allies, the people you think of as decent chaps. Popularis, on the other hand, is something you call someone else. It means someone who appeals to the wider population, the less well-off, the groups in the middle, and comes at them, promises to give them things, to make reforms that they will like in the hope that they will vote for you. Rocks the boat, doesn't fit in with the consensus, doesn't fit in with the status quo in the established group, but actually wants to do things. And in doing so, we guess they might do things that are quite good for the state, but also they're going to gain lots of credit, lots of support, lots of success for themselves and become more important, and therefore perhaps unbalance the careful nature by which the Roman Republic means that jobs, titles, office are shared around widely, or at least widely within a limited group of people who are optimates, who are boni, who deserve to have these things. But popularis is not something you would tend to call yourself. It's what you call an opponent. Think of it this way, as a modern parallel. In a democracy today, obviously any politician would like to think of themselves as popular, the same as any party. They want voters to vote for them. That's the very nature of it. However, as soon as you describe a leader or a party as populist, that immediately implies that it's popular with the wrong people. So this is going to the lowest common denominator, the poorly educated, the ignorant, not the people, not yourself, and people like you and people who share your views that are obviously the best views of all, but others. People from outside who, again, unfortunately there might be lots of them, but endanger what you think is the right thing to do. So popularis, like populist today, is a criticism. It immediately damns someone. It says that they are appealing to the lowest common denominator, they are trying to get the riffraff, the mob on their side. It very quickly leads into all these ideas. And it's very much the same. So popularis is what you call an opponent, a maverick, a Tiberius Gracchus, a Saturninus, a Julius Caesar. And whilst these people are consciously taking up these popular causes, again, we ought to remember that they can win elections this way. So it is a little quick, a little bit broad brush, just plain wrong to then imply that actually most people don't like what they're doing. Most of the boni, the optimates, might not like what they're doing, but that doesn't mean that the bulk of voters do, because obviously by their very nature, if you win the election, you've done pretty well. You have substantial bodies of support. So again, it's one of those things where it's more about showing us how the Romans saw the world and how they saw their public life. And both terms very much come from a particular perspective that is inclined towards keeping the situation as it is, with relatively small number of highly successful families dominating. And yes, a few new men will come along, a few other people will squeeze in, but that won't fundamentally change the fact that there'll always be a Metellus around, there'll always be a Livius Drusus, a Claudius. These families that get the consulship generation after generation will still be there, and they'll still have their money, their estates, their rental property in Rome itself, their clients, all the people under obligation to them. So they're going to stay important no matter what happens. A popularis is someone, and one of the striking things about many of the most prominent populares in the later Republic is that they come from pretty distinguished families. Tiberius Gracchus was having a very good career before he became tribune. He's won fame, though he has of course been involved in a scandal where an army surrendered in Spain, but nevertheless you'd look at him and think, well, this is someone, his father's been twice consul, he's probably going to go up pretty well and pretty high. Claudius, the tribune who changes his name from the familiar form Claudius into the more urban, I suppose, more sort of ordinary man in the streets, Claudius. As a point, the fact that everyone's going to know he's still an aristocrat of aristocrats, a patrician with this very ancient family, loads of money, loads of cash, the education that you get with all of that, and the assumption of your right to lead that comes with all of that as well, is all still there. So he wants to have it both ways. But again, these people champion popular causes and people vote for them. And you have strange situations when Caesar brought in his land law in 59 BC, where critics will say, well, I agree with everything that's in the law, but I hate the man who's doing it, so I'll vote against it and block it. One of the problems is the conflict between people espousing various popularis causes and those who are determined that no one should get the credit for solving this problem, means that there's a high level of inertia in the political system, in particularly the 1st century BC, that causes these problems to grow and grow and fester, and as various popularis leaders come along, they get more success, more support. Bear in mind, though, again, there are limits to how coherent either group can be. In the end, The Optimates, the Boni, will compete with each other for the consulships of each year, for the other magistracies of each year. And similarly, Populares tend to be individuals. They might have alliances with one or two others, but it's not a party. And it's not about trying to get their men in. Roman politics remains, in its essence, individual, because you can't share a consulship with someone. There are the two consuls of each year. Whoever gets those two posts has the job. Their friends might be able to influence them, but they cannot actually share that power. And the same with all the other posts. So you are always competing against everyone else. You are always trying to stress how much better you are than everyone else, how much better your family is than everyone else. And with a Popularis leader, yes, you can get support, people can back you, they can turn up to back your candidature, they can turn up to back you when you're making speeches, when you're proposing laws, but they can't actually share in any direct way in the power. So again, it's still an individual thing. These are not organized parties. They are ways of thinking, styles of doing politics almost. And they're also not fixed. You can move from one to the other. Though, of course, there might be resentment from some of the others of a similar persuasion. But again, it's not an organized, coherent party in any shape or form. And if you try and present Roman politics as working like that, then it simply doesn't function that way. And this is the classic case. I mean, one of the things that always bothers me is when people will talk about Julius Caesar being opposed by the Senate in 49 BC and the civil war that follows. Or sometimes it's opposed by the Optimates, and neither is true. The majority of the Senate didn't want a civil war. They wanted both Pompey and Caesar to disarm, and they wanted to be left to get on with things, doing what Roman aristocrats always did. Even people who are quite committed and will end up joining one side, like Cicero himself, don't really see the point of a war. They think it's unnecessary, it's unwise, why should we destroy so much, take so many risks for the sake of ending Julius Caesar's political career? But it's not even all of the Optimates that will join Pompey and those with him and Cato and the others to fight against Caesar. A significant proportion of them do. But there's the classic case of the consul of 50, Marcellus, who had gone weeks before to present a sword to Pompey when a rumour had come to Rome that Julius Caesar had invaded Italy. In fact, the rumour was false, and it all looks a bit silly afterwards. But this is a man who's going to Pompey and saying, lead us in a civil war, defend us against Julius Caesar. Within a few weeks, he's changed his mind, and he remains neutral throughout the civil war. Now, that's partly because of family connections, because he's, married to Octavia. But nevertheless, it shows that we can't ever make this too simple, and we can't make this too rigid. This isn't a time of formal political parties in any sort of modern sense. So, Optimates Populares, style of politics, tells you something about your attitudes, what you want. To some extent, particularly more on the side of the Boni, the Optimates gives you some idea of people with whom you will sympathize and ally, at least on certain occasions and in certain causes, but it doesn't go much beyond that. It's a lot looser, it's a lot more individual, because that's the nature of Roman public life.